David had always hated these corporate conferences. The fancy hotels, the awkward small talk, the endless PowerPoint presentations about quarterly targets and synergy. He was a software developer, more comfortable with code than conversations, and these 3-day events always left him drained. But his company insisted that everyone attend at least one conference a year. So here he was, standing in the lobby of the Waldorf Astoria in New York City, feeling completely out of place. The lobby was something else, though. He had to admit that. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling like frozen waterfalls, catching the afternoon light and scattering it in 1,000 directions. The marble floor was so polished he could almost see his reflection in it. Leather chairs and velvet sofas were arranged in elegant clusters, where business people in expensive suits chatted over coffee and champagne. Everyone seemed to know exactly where they belonged, what to say, how to hold themselves. David felt like an imposter in his off-the-rack blazer. It was the lunch break between sessions, and most of his colleagues had headed to the hotel restaurant or the bar. David had tried joining them for the first 2 meals, but the forced networking exhausted him. He'd spent 20 minutes that morning listening to a sales director from Boston talk about his boat. David didn't care about boats. He didn't even like the ocean that much, so he'd grabbed a sandwich from the coffee station and retreated to the lobby, hoping to find a quiet corner where he could check his phone and pretend to be busy. That's when he saw it. Tucked away near the tall windows overlooking the street, almost hidden by a few potted plants, was a grand piano. A real one, black and gleaming, with the kind of elegant curves that made it look more like a piece of art than an instrument. David stopped walking. He stared at the piano, feeling something stir in his chest, something he hadn't felt in a long time. His mother had taught him to play when he was 7 years old. She'd been a music teacher before he was born, before she'd decided to stay home and raise him and his 2 sisters. Their old upright piano had been the centerpiece of their living room, more important than the television or the couch. His mother used to say that a house without music was just a building with walls. She'd been patient with him, even when he got frustrated and wanted to quit. Even when he'd rather play video games or watch cartoons, she never forced him, but she encouraged him, and somehow that was enough. By the time he was 15, he could play most of the classical pieces she loved. Chopin, Debussy, Beethoven. The music had been their special language, the thing they shared when words weren't enough. She'd died when he was 23. Cancer. It came fast and took her faster. At the funeral, David had wanted to play something on the piano at the church, but when he sat down at the bench, his hands wouldn't move. They just sat there on the keys, frozen, useless. He hadn't touched a piano since. That was 9 years ago. But now, standing in this fancy hotel lobby, he felt pulled toward the instrument like a magnet. His feet moved before his brain caught up. The sandwich sat forgotten on a side table. His conference badge swung on its lanyard around his neck as he walked. When he reached the piano, he hesitated. Was he allowed to play it? Would someone stop him? He looked around, but nobody seemed to be paying attention. The lobby was busy with people coming and going, talking and laughing, completely absorbed in their own worlds. David sat down on the bench. The leather was soft and cool. He lifted the fallboard, revealing the keys. They were perfect, ivory white and ebony black, without a scratch or smudge. His fingers hovered over them, trembling slightly. He took a breath and touched middle C. The note rang out pure and clear, better than any piano he'd ever played. The Steinway was in perfect tune, the kind of instrument most people only dreamed of playing. Before he could overthink it, his hands found their positions. Muscle memory from years ago kicked in and he began to play. Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, his mother's favorite piece, the one she used to play on Sunday mornings while he ate cereal at the kitchen table. The notes flowed from his fingers like water. Soft at first, tentative, like he was asking permission, but then stronger, more confident. The melody was melancholy and beautiful, full of longing and memory. His eyes closed. He wasn't in the hotel lobby anymore. He was back in his childhood home, sitting next to his mother on the old upright bench, watching her hands dance across the keys while she hummed along. He could almost smell her perfume. That floral scent she always wore. He could almost hear her voice. Feel the music, David, don't just play the notes. Feel what the composer felt when he wrote them. The lobby sounds faded away. The conversations, the footsteps on marble, the ding of the elevator, All of it disappeared. There was only the piano and the music and the memories flooding through him. Every note was a moment with her. Every phrase was something she'd taught him. His fingers moved across the keys with a confidence he'd forgotten he had. What he didn't realize was that people had started to notice. The conversations nearby had grown quieter. Heads were turning. A woman in a business suit paused mid-sentence to listen. A hotel employee stopped pushing his luggage cart. A couple sitting on one of the velvet sofas set down their phones. The music filled the space in a way that made people stop and pay attention. It wasn't aggressive or showy. It was honest. Raw. You could hear the emotion in every note, the kind of playing that comes from somewhere deep and real. This wasn't someone showing off their technical skills. This was someone playing from the heart. More people gathered. They formed a loose semicircle around the piano. Careful not to get too close, not wanting to disturb whatever magic was happening. Some held their coffee cups forgotten in their hands. Others had their briefcases hanging from their shoulders, halfway to wherever they'd been going. But they all stopped. They all listened. David played through the piece, completely unaware of his audience. His fingers knew exactly where to go, exactly how much pressure to apply, exactly when to speed up and when to slow down. The years fell away. He was 23 again, then 18, then 12, then 7. Every version of himself that had ever sat at a piano with his mother was there in that lobby, playing together. The final notes hung in the air, soft and fading, like the last light of sunset. David's hands stayed on the keys, his eyes still closed, his breath shallow. He felt lighter somehow, like something heavy he'd been carrying for 9 years had finally been set down, and that's when he felt it. Another presence beside him. The bench shifted slightly as someone sat down next to him. Before he could open his eyes or turn his head, he heard the sound of the piano again. But he wasn't playing. Someone else's hands were on the keys. Wrinkled hands, graceful hands, hands that knew exactly what they were doing. They picked up where he'd left off, playing the harmony part, the accompaniment that turned the solo into a duet. The notes wove together with his melody, supporting it, lifting it, making it more than it had been alone. David's eyes flew open. He turned his head and found himself looking at an elderly woman sitting beside him on the bench. She wore an elegant navy dress and a pearl necklace. Her silver hair was styled perfectly. Her eyes were closed, just as his had been, and there was a small smile on her lips. She played with the confidence of someone who'd been doing this her entire life. Without thinking, David's hands returned to the keys. He continued the melody while she played the harmony. They'd never practiced together. They'd never even met. But somehow, impossibly, they were playing in perfect sync. His fingers and hers moved in a dance they both knew by heart, following the same invisible sheet music, feeling the same rhythm, breathing the same musical language. The crowd in the lobby grew larger. People were filming now, their phones held up to capture this unexpected moment. But neither David nor the woman seemed to notice or care. They were lost in the music, two strangers who'd become partners in the span of a single breath. The Chopin piece ended naturally, the final chord fading into silence. But before the crowd could applaud, before the spell could break, the elderly woman's hands moved again. This time she started something new. Debussy, Clair de Lune. David recognized it immediately. Another piece his mother had loved. He jumped in without hesitation, his right hand taking the melody while her left hand provided the flowing, dreamlike bass notes. It was like they'd been playing together for years. Her touch was lighter than his, more delicate, but somehow stronger too. She knew exactly when to pull back and when to push forward. She made space for his playing while filling in the gaps he didn't even know were there. They moved through Clair de Lune with the same natural rhythm they'd found in the Chopin. The music was softer now, more contemplative. It painted pictures in the air, moonlight on water, shadows moving through a garden at night, peace after chaos. The lobby felt transformed, like they'd created a small sanctuary in the middle of the busy hotel. When that piece ended, the woman surprised him again. Her hands began playing the opening notes of Rhapsody in Blue, but with a playful twist. She was jazzing it up, adding little flourishes and unexpected chord progressions. David couldn't help but smile. He matched her energy, letting his fingers dance across the higher register while she commanded the lower notes like a jazz pianist in a smoky club. People in the crowd were laughing now, not mocking but delighted. The shift from the serious classical pieces to this playful interpretation was unexpected and joyful. The woman's eyes were open now, and David could see them twinkling with mischief. She was having fun. He was too. More fun than he'd had in months, maybe years. They played off each other, taking turns with little improvisational riffs, each trying to surprise the other. When David threw in an extra trill, she responded with a dramatic glissando that made several people in the crowd gasp and clap. When she added a syncopated rhythm, he matched it and doubled down, making it even more complex. It was a conversation without words, a game only they understood. The final chord of Rhapsody in Blue hit like an exclamation point. Both their hands came down on the keys at exactly the same moment, perfectly in sync, and the sound echoed through the lobby with a force that made the chandeliers seem to shimmer. The crowd erupted. The applause was deafening. People were cheering, whistling, clapping with their hands held high above their heads. David and the woman finally broke their focus on the piano and looked up, seeming to notice for the first time just how many people had gathered. There must have been 60 or 70 people surrounding them, with more standing on the balcony overlooking the lobby, their phones out, capturing every second. David felt his face flush. He wasn't used to this kind of attention. His hands were shaking slightly from the adrenaline. He turned to the woman beside him, wanting to say something, to thank her, to ask her who she was and how she'd known to join him. But when he actually looked at her face, really looked at it, the words caught in his throat. She was older than he'd first thought. Maybe 75, maybe 80. But there was something about her features, the shape of her face, the way she held herself. Something familiar. Not like he knew her personally, but like he'd seen her face before. In a photograph, maybe. Or on a poster. The woman stood up from the bench, smoothing down her dress. She extended her hand to David, and he shook it, still sitting, still stunned. Her grip was firm despite her age. "Thank you for that," she said. Her voice was warm but carried an accent. European. Russian, maybe. "It has been a long time since I have played with someone who understands the music that way." Thank you," David stammered. "You're incredible. I mean, your playing is—" "I've never experienced anything like that," she smiled. "You give yourself too little credit. Your mother taught you well." David froze. His blood went cold. How did she know about his mother? He hadn't mentioned her. He hadn't said anything at all. They'd only played together. They hadn't spoken a single word until this moment. "How did you—" he started, but before he could finish the question, someone from the crowd called out, "Oh my God, is that really her?" Heads turned. Whispers started rippling through the crowd. David saw people pulling out their phones, not to record anymore, but to search for something, to confirm something. "It's Elena Volkov," someone else said, louder this time. "It's actually her." The name hit David like a physical force. Elena Volkov. He knew that name. Everyone who'd ever studied classical music knew that name. She was a legend, one of the greatest pianists of the 20th century. She'd played in every major concert hall in the world. She'd recorded dozens of albums. She'd won Grammy Awards and competitions and honors that most musicians couldn't even dream of. His mother had owned several of her recordings. David remembered the CD cases lined up on the shelf next to the piano. Elena Volkov playing Rachmaninoff. Elena Volkov performing Chopin. His mother used to play them on Sunday afternoons while she cooked dinner, conducting along with an invisible orchestra, humming the melodies. David couldn't finish the sentence. His brain wasn't working properly. "Yes," she said simply. "But please call me Elena." The crowd pressed closer. David saw hotel security guards materializing from somewhere, looking panicked. The hotel manager, a thin man in a perfect suit, was speed-walking across the lobby, his face a mixture of excitement and terror. This was probably not the kind of attention he wanted in his lobby, even if it was from a world-famous musician. Elena seemed completely unbothered by the commotion. She kept her attention on David, studying his face with a curious expression. "You really don't know, do you?" she asked. "Know what? Why I sat down to play with you?" David shook his head. Nothing made sense. Why would Elena Volkov, a living legend who'd retired from public performance over a decade ago, sit down at a hotel lobby piano with a random software developer? Why would she know anything about his mother? Elena glanced at the crowd, then at the approaching security guards and hotel manager. She made a decision quickly, "Walk with me," she said, not asking but telling. She linked her arm through his, and before David knew what was happening, she was guiding him away from the piano, through the crowd which parted like water for her. The security guards hesitated, unsure whether to stop them or help clear the path. They walked to a quieter corner of the lobby, near the tall windows. Elena moved with the kind of grace that came from decades of stage performance, comfortable being watched but also knowing how to command a space. She led David to 2 chairs tucked away from the main traffic, partially hidden by a large plant. "Sit," she said. David sat. His conference badge swung on his chest. He'd completely forgotten about the afternoon sessions. He was supposed to be in a meeting about cloud infrastructure in 10 minutes. That seemed laughably unimportant now. Elena settled into the chair across from him. Behind them, the crowd was still gathered around the piano, talking excitedly, sharing videos, reliving what they'd just witnessed. The hotel manager was trying to disperse people, but nobody wanted to leave. Security guards stood nearby, watching Elena from a distance but not approaching. "Your name is David Chen," Elena said. It wasn't a question. "How do you know that?" "Your conference badge," she pointed out with a small smile. "I can still read even at my age." David felt foolish, of course. The badge hanging around his neck had his name printed in large letters. "But you said something about my mother before." He pressed. "You said she taught me well. How could you possibly know about her?" Elena's expression softened. The playfulness from their piano performance was gone, replaced by something gentler. Sadder, maybe. "Your mother was Catherine Chen, yes?" David's chest tightened. "Yes, did you know her?" "I taught her," Elena said simply. "A long time ago. Before you were born. She was one of my students at Juilliard during a teaching residency in the 1980s. One of the most talented students I ever had, actually." David felt like the floor had dropped out from under him. His mother had studied at Juilliard. He'd known that. But she'd never mentioned studying with Elena Volkov. That seemed like something you'd mention. That seemed like something you'd talk about constantly. "She never told me," David said quietly. "No, I suppose she wouldn't have. Catherine was never one to brag about such things. She was serious about music but humble. She had the technique and the talent to perform professionally. I encouraged her to pursue a concert career. But she chose a different path. She became a teacher, and then a mother." Elena nodded. "Yes. And from what I heard through mutual acquaintances over the years, she was excellent at both." "She gave private lessons, yes?" "Taught children in your town?" "Yeah, she did. Our house was always full of kids coming and going for piano lessons. Every afternoon after school, every Saturday morning." David could picture it perfectly. The parade of students, some eager, some reluctant. His mother's patient voice coming from the living room while he did homework at the kitchen table. "She had a gift for teaching," Elena said. "Even when she was my student, I could see it. Some people are meant to perform. Others are meant to pass the music on. Both are equally important. Both are equally valuable." David felt tears prickling at his eyes. He'd spent 9 years feeling like his mother had wasted her talent. Like she'd given up her dreams to raise a family. Like somehow he and his sisters had stolen something from her. "When did she pass?" Elena asked gently. 9 years ago, cancer. I am sorry. I lost touch with her after she left New York. I wish I had known." They sat in silence for a moment. Around them, the lobby continued its chaos. People were still filming, still talking about what they'd witnessed. But in their little corner, there was stillness. "You play like her," Elena finally said. "The moment I heard you start that Chopin, I recognized her teaching. The phrasing, the way you shape the melody, even your hand position. She taught you everything exactly as I taught her." "I haven't played in 9 years, David admitted. Not since her funeral. I couldn't. My hands just wouldn't work. But today they did. Today they did." He agreed. Elena studied David's face with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. It wasn't unkind, but it was searching. Like she was looking for something specific. Finally, she seemed to find it. "You carry guilt," she said. It wasn't a question. David looked down at his hands. The same hands that had just played the piano for the first time in 9 years. "I don't know what you mean." "Yes, you do. I can hear it in your playing. Beautiful technique, genuine emotion, but underneath there is something heavy, something you have been carrying that does not belong to you." David wanted to deny it, but the words wouldn't come. This woman, This stranger who'd appeared out of nowhere had seen through him in a matter of minutes, had heard in his music what he'd barely admitted to himself. "She gave up everything for us," he said quietly. "She could have been like you. She could have performed all over the world. But instead she stayed in a small town teaching kids how to play hot cross buns and Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star." Elena made a sound that was almost a laugh, but not quite. "And you think this means she wasted her life?" "I think she deserved more." "What you think she deserved and what she chose are different things, David. Your mother made her decisions with open eyes and a full heart. She knew exactly what she was giving up and what she was gaining. And from everything I knew about Catherine, she was not the kind of woman who did things she did not want to do." David thought about that. His mother had been strong-willed, that was true. When she decided something, that was it. No amount of arguing or persuading would change her mind. But still, she used to play for hours when we were kids, he said. Late at night after we'd gone to bed, I'd sneak out to the top of the stairs and listen. She'd play all the difficult pieces, the concert pieces. Rachmaninoff, Liszt, Prokofiev. Things she never played during the day, and sometimes I'd hear her crying while she played. Elena was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was gentle. "May I tell you something about your mother? Something I learned when she was my student?" David nodded. Catherine came to Juilliard with a full scholarship. She was 19 years old and more talented than students who had been training since they were 5. She had this natural gift, this ability to make the piano sing. Everyone knew she was going to be successful. The faculty talked about her. Other students were jealous of her. "I thought I would be teaching the next great concert pianist." Elena paused, looking out the window at the New York street beyond. But during her second year, something changed. She started questioning everything. She would come to my office and we would talk for hours. Not about music, but about life. About purpose. About what it meant to be successful. She said that when she performed, she felt something missing, like she was speaking a language but no one was really listening, not in the way that mattered to her. "What did you tell her?" David asked. "I told her the truth. That being a concert pianist is a lonely life. You travel constantly. You perform in cities and never see them beyond the hotel and the concert hall. You practice alone for hours every day. You live for brief moments on stage where you connect with an audience you will never know. It is beautiful, yes, but it is also hard. And not everyone is meant for it." Elena turned back to David. "Your mother told me she wanted to teach. Not at a university or a conservatory, but real teaching. Working with children, with beginners, helping them discover what music could mean to them. She wanted to build a community. She wanted to be part of people's daily lives, not just a special occasion they attended once a year. And she wanted a family. She was very clear about that." "You tried to talk her out of it," David guessed. "Of course I did. I was her teacher. It was my job to encourage her talent." But Catherine was stubborn. She finished her degree and then she went home. She started teaching private lessons. She met your father. She built the life she wanted. And every Christmas I would get a card from her with a photo of her family. You, your sisters, the piano in your living room. She looked happy, David. Genuinely happy. David felt something loosening in his chest. A knot he'd been carrying so long he'd forgotten it was there. "But those late-night sessions," he said, "playing the concert pieces and crying. Do you know why she was crying?" Elena asked. David shook his head. "You assumed it was regret, sadness about the life she did not choose. But perhaps it was joy. Perhaps it was gratitude. Perhaps she was crying because the music still moved her that deeply, and she was thankful she could still feel that, even in her own living room at midnight. Perhaps she was crying because she had a home full of sleeping children who she loved more than applause. Perhaps she was crying because she had both things, the music and the family, in a way that worked for her." David felt tears running down his face now. He wiped them away quickly, embarrassed, but Elena reached over and squeezed his hand. "You have spent 9 years not playing because you thought you did not deserve to," she said. "You thought that music was something your mother sacrificed for you, so how could you enjoy it? But David, your mother did not sacrifice music for you. She gave music to you. That is completely different." Behind them, the crowd around the piano had mostly dispersed, though people kept walking by to look at the instrument, to point and tell newcomers what had happened. The hotel manager had given up trying to control the situation and was now posing for photos with guests. Security guards stood at attention, alert for any sign that Elena might need assistance. David took a shaky breath. I don't know what to do with this information. Elena smiled. You play. You let yourself feel joy when you sit at a piano instead of guilt. You honor your mother by living the life you want to live, not by punishing yourself for the life you think she could not have. It's not that simple. No, Elena agreed. It is not. But it is a start. They sat together for a while longer. Elena told him stories about his mother at Juilliard. The time Catherine had performed a Beethoven sonata so beautifully that the entire class had been silent for a full minute afterward. The time she'd stayed up all night helping another student prepare for an audition, even though she had her own performance the next day. The time she'd brought homemade cookies to class and they'd all eaten them while discussing the emotional architecture of a Mozart concerto. David listened, hungry for these glimpses of his mother as a young woman. The mother he'd known had been warm and patient and funny, but also tired sometimes, worn down by the daily work of raising 3 kids and running a household and teaching endless piano lessons. These stories revealed someone lighter, someone full of possibility and passion and joy. She sounds amazing, David said. She was, and she would be very proud of you, David. Not because of how you played today, though, that was beautiful, but because you showed up. Because you sat down at that piano even though it scared you. Because you let the music in again. A hotel employee approached them cautiously. Ms. Volkov? I'm so sorry to interrupt, but there are several reporters outside who heard about your performance. They're asking for a statement or an interview. Elena waved her hand dismissively. Tell them I have no comment. Tell them I am retired and was simply enjoying a moment of spontaneous music with a talented stranger. They're asking about your health, about whether this means you're performing again. I am 81 years old and had a stroke 15 years ago that partially paralyzed my left hand. Elena said matter-of-factly, I am not performing again. This was a private moment that happened to have witnesses. The employee nodded and hurried away. David stared at Elena. Your hand is paralyzed? Partially. The left one. I can still use it for daily activities, but concert-level playing is impossible. Or at least it was impossible. Today, for those few minutes, everything worked the way it used to. I think perhaps your mother was looking out for both of us. David didn't know what to say to that. He wasn't sure he believed in that kind of thing. But he also couldn't explain how Elena had appeared at exactly the right moment, or how they'd played together so perfectly despite never meeting, or how she'd known exactly what he needed to hear. What happens now? He asked. Elena looked at him thoughtfully. Then she pulled out her phone, which was surprisingly modern for a woman her age, and tapped a few buttons. Give me your number. David recited it, and his phone buzzed a moment later with a text from an unknown number. Just a simple message, Elena. I live in Connecticut, she said. About 2 hours from here. I have a house with 7 pianos in it. Because I am old and ridiculous and cannot resist buying beautiful instruments, they mostly sit unused because I cannot play them the way I once did. But they are there. And my guest house is empty. I don't understand, David said. Come stay for a week. Take time off from your conference and your software and your normal life. Come play the pianos. We will talk about your mother. I will teach you the things she never got to teach you. And you will help me remember what it feels like to share music with someone who understands. I can't just leave. I have work. I have responsibilities. Elena raised an eyebrow. David, you are at a conference in a hotel. You are going to sit through presentations about things you could read in an email. Meanwhile, I am offering you a chance to study with someone your mother studied with, to connect with a part of her you never knew existed, and to maybe, possibly, figure out what role music should play in your own life. Which of these seems more important? When she put it that way, it wasn't even a choice. 2 days later, David stood in front of a gate in rural Connecticut, holding a small suitcase and feeling like he'd made a terrible mistake. He'd called his boss and claimed a family emergency. He'd texted his sisters to tell them something incredible had happened. He'd packed enough clothes for a week and caught a train out of the city without letting himself think too hard about what he was doing. Now, standing at this gate with an intercom button and a view of a long driveway disappearing into trees, reality was setting in. What was he doing? He was a 32-year-old man who wrote code for a living. He had a mortgage and a car payment and a cat that his neighbor was feeding. He hadn't played piano seriously since he was a teenager. What made him think he could show up at Elena Volkov's house and pretend to be a serious musician? Before he could talk himself into calling an Uber back to the train station, the intercom crackled. Stop panicking and press the button, David. He jumped. Then he pressed the button. How did you know I was panicking? Because there is a camera and I can see your face. Come up to the house, the gate swung open. David walked up the driveway, pulling his suitcase behind him. The property was beautiful. Tall trees created a canopy overhead. Gardens lined the path, full of flowers he couldn't name. After about 5 minutes of walking, during which he seriously questioned his cardiovascular fitness, the house came into view. It wasn't what he expected. He'd imagined something modern and cold, all glass and steel. But this was a traditional New England home, painted white with black shutters, a wraparound porch, and actual rocking chairs. It looked like the kind of place where you'd drink lemonade and watch fireflies at dusk. It looked like a home. Elena was waiting on the porch. She wore jeans and a simple sweater. Looking nothing like the elegant woman from the hotel, she looked like somebody's grandmother. You came, she said, smiling. I did, though I'm still not sure why. Because you are smarter than you think you are. Come, I will show you the guest house, and then we will have lunch. You must be hungry from the train. The guest house was a small cottage behind the main building, complete with its own kitchen and bathroom. It was cozy and bright, with big windows and comfortable furniture. David dropped his suitcase and followed Elena back to the main house. The inside was as warm as the outside. Hardwood floors, soft rugs, bookshelves crammed with volumes in multiple languages, and pianos. She hadn't been exaggerating. There was a grand piano in the living room, an upright in the dining room. He could see another through a doorway down the hall. 7? He asked. 8, actually. I bought another one last month. A lovely Bosendorfer from Austria. I could not resist. They ate lunch on the back patio overlooking a small pond. Sandwiches and fruit and iced tea. They talked about everything except music. Elena asked about his work, and he found himself explaining coding in a way he'd never done before, trying to make her understand the puzzle-like satisfaction of solving a problem. She told him about the year she'd spent in Japan, teaching at a conservatory in Tokyo and learning to love raw fish. After lunch, she led him to a room he hadn't seen yet. It was a converted barn, all exposed beams and high ceilings, and in the center of the room sat the most beautiful piano David had ever seen. A concert grand, black and gleaming, perfect. This is where I used to practice, Elena said. 8 hours a day, sometimes more. Now I come here to sit and remember. But today, you will play. I don't know if I can. Yesterday in the hotel was different. It just happened. But here, knowing you're listening, then I will not listen. I will be in the house. You take your time, play whatever you want, see what comes out. She squeezed his shoulder and left, closing the door behind her. David stood alone in the barn. The piano waited. He sat down on the bench and put his hands on the keys. They felt like home. He started with scales, just warming up, getting comfortable. Then he moved into some of the easier pieces he'd learned as a kid. Children's songs, simple melodies. His fingers remembered. After about 20 minutes, he felt ready. He began playing Chopin's Nocturne again, the piece that had started everything at the hotel. But this time was different. This time he wasn't playing from grief or memory. He was playing because he wanted to. Because the music was beautiful and he could bring it to life. His hands moved with confidence. The notes sang. And for the first time in 9 years, David felt like himself again. Like a piece that had been missing had clicked back into place. He played for 2 hours straight, moving from Chopin to Debussy to pieces he'd almost forgotten he knew. When he finally stopped, his hands were tired and his back was sore and he felt more alive than he had in years. Elena appeared in the doorway as if summoned. Better? So much better. Good. Tomorrow we begin real work. The next week passed in a blur. Every morning David woke up in the guest house and ate breakfast on the porch while birds sang in the trees. Then he'd walk to the barn and practice for 3 hours. Elena would appear around midday and they'd have lunch together, talking about music theory and composition and the history of different pieces. In the afternoons, Elena taught him the way she'd taught his mother 40 years earlier. She sat beside him at the piano and showed him techniques he'd never learned. How to use the pedal more effectively, how to shape a phrase to bring out its emotional core, how to listen to silence as carefully as sound. She was demanding but never cruel. When he made a mistake, she'd stop him and demonstrate the correct way, playing with her damaged left hand and somehow making it work through sheer force of will. When he got something right, she'd nod and say, "Yes, exactly like that." Again. In the evenings, they'd sit in the living room and she'd play recordings for him, Some were her own performances from decades ago. Others were pianists she admired. She'd pause the music to point out specific moments, to explain what made them special. She taught him to listen like a musician, not just a fan. On the fourth night, after dinner, Elena disappeared and came back with a cardboard box. "I want to show you something," she said. Inside the box were letters, dozens of them, handwritten on different types of paper, some yellowed with age. David recognized his mother's handwriting immediately. "She wrote to me," Elena explained. "Not often, maybe once or twice a year. But she wrote." I saved every letter. David picked one up with shaking hands. It was dated 15 years ago, when he would have been 17. "Dear Elena," his mother had written, "I hope this letter finds you well. I heard you performed Rachmaninoff's second concerto in London last month. I wanted to be there so badly, but of course life intervened, as it always does. David is applying to colleges now. He's brilliant with computers, though I've been encouraging him to consider music school. He has your gift for making the piano sing, though he doesn't believe me when I tell him. I know he could be great if he wanted to, but I also know that greatness comes in many forms, and I will support whatever he chooses. That's what you taught me, even if you didn't mean to, that there are many ways to live a meaningful life with music." David couldn't read any more through the tears. He set the letter down carefully. "She was so proud of you," Elena said softly. "Every letter mentioned you and your sisters, your accomplishments, your personalities, your struggles. She was never uncertain about her choices, David. Not once in all these letters did she express regret. Can I read them all?" "Of course. Take them back to the guest house. They are yours now." David spent that entire night reading his mother's letters to Elena. They covered everything. Updates about family life, questions about musical interpretation, stories about funny things her students had done, concerns about aging parents, joy about watching her children grow, and woven through all of it was a deep sense of contentment. His mother had been happy. Genuinely, truly happy. The next morning, David sat at the piano in the barn and played differently, lighter, freer. He wasn't carrying his mother's ghost anymore. He was carrying her gift. On his last day, Elena sat him down in the living room. "I want to talk to you about what happens when you leave here," she said. "I go back to my regular life, back to work." "Yes, but what about the piano?" David had been thinking about that all week. "I don't know. I love playing again, but I'm not a concert pianist. I'm not even a teacher. I'm just someone who likes to play. And that is enough," Elena said firmly. "You do not need to make music your career for it to be important in your life. You do not need to perform for thousands of people for your playing to matter. You simply need to keep doing it. For yourself. For your mother's memory. For the joy of it." "How do I do that? I don't even have a piano at my apartment." Elena smiled. "About that, I may have taken the liberty of having a piano delivered to your address. Nothing fancy, just a nice upright. It should arrive tomorrow." David stared at her. "You bought me a piano? I am a rich old woman with more money than sense and no children to leave it to. Let me buy you a piano. Besides, it is not really for you. It is for your mother. She would want you to have one." David felt overwhelmed. This entire week had been overwhelming. This stranger who wasn't a stranger had given him back something he thought he'd lost forever. Not just music, but a connection to his mother, an understanding of her choices, a freedom from guilt he'd been carrying for so long it had become part of his identity. "I don't know how to thank you," he said. "Play," Elena said simply. "That is all the thanks I need. Play for yourself, and maybe someday play for others too. Start small. Coffee shops, community centers, retirement homes. Share what your mother gave you. That is how you honor her." They hugged goodbye on the porch. David promised to visit again, to keep in touch, to send her recordings of his progress. Elena made him promise to keep practicing, to not let life swallow the music again. As the car pulled away down the long driveway, David looked back at the house. Elena stood on the porch waving, this incredible woman who had changed his life in a matter of days. He pulled out his phone and sent a text to his sisters. "I have so much to tell you about Mom." 3 months had passed since David's week in Connecticut, and life looked completely different. The piano Elena had sent was positioned in his living room, dominating the small apartment in a way that felt right. He played every morning before work, even if just for 15 minutes. He played every evening when he got home. Some nights he played until midnight, losing himself in the music the way his mother used to. His cat had adjusted to the noise. His neighbors hadn't complained. In fact, the elderly woman who lived below him had knocked on his door one evening to tell him how much she enjoyed listening to him practice. It reminded her of her own childhood, she said, when her father played the violin. Work had become more manageable, too. David realized he'd been using his job as an excuse to avoid everything else in life. Now that he had music again, he had balance. He was actually more productive during his work hours because he wasn't trying to fill an emptiness with code. His sisters had been amazed by the story. He'd told them everything over video calls, showing them his mother's letters that Elena had given him, playing for them on his new piano. His younger sister had cried. His older sister had admitted she'd always felt guilty too, wondering if their mother had given up too much for them. "We have to stop feeling guilty for being loved," David told them. Something Elena had said to him during one of their lessons. "Mom chose us. That doesn't mean we took something from her. It means she gave us a gift." But the biggest change came from an unexpected place. One of David's co-workers, a woman named Priya who worked in the marketing department, had seen the video from the hotel. The one that had gone viral. Millions of people had watched David and Elena play together that day. The video had been shared on news sites, music forums, social media platforms. Headlines like "Legendary Pianist," "Emerges from Retirement for Surprise Duet," and "The Most Beautiful Thing You'll See Today" had spread the footage. Everywhere, Priya had recognized David in the video and approached him at work. "That was you," she'd said, excited. "That was really you playing with Elena Volkov." David had tried to downplay it, but Priya wouldn't let him. She convinced him to play at the company holiday party. "Just a few songs," she'd said. "Nothing fancy. It would be fun." David had been terrified, but he'd agreed. And it had been fun. People had actually listened. They'd clapped. Several co-workers had come up afterward to tell him they didn't know he played, to ask where he'd learned, to request specific songs for next time. From there, word spread. A friend of a friend ran a small coffee shop in Brooklyn and asked if David would play on Saturday afternoons. The pay was almost nothing, but David said yes. Then a community center reached out, wondering if he'd be interested in performing at their monthly senior lunch program. Then a local library asked if he'd play for their evening reading series. David started saying yes to everything. Not because he wanted to become famous or start a music career, but because Elena was right. Sharing the music felt good. It felt like something his mother would have wanted. Every time he sat down at a piano in front of people, even if it was just 5 seniors eating sandwiches in a community center, he felt connected to her. The performance he was most nervous about was at a retirement home. The activities director had seen one of his coffee shop performances and asked if he'd come play for the residents. Some of them had dementia, she explained. Some were in wheelchairs. Some fell asleep during programs. She wanted him to know in advance that it might not be the most attentive audience. David had shown up on a Tuesday afternoon with a folder of music his mother used to play. Standards from the 40s and 50s, classical pieces, some lighter jazz. The recreation room had a beat-up upright piano that was slightly out of tune. About 20 residents were there when he started. Some chatted with each other. Some stared out the windows. One man snored loudly in the front row. David felt ridiculous. He almost walked out, but then he started playing and something shifted. Heads turned. Conversation stopped. A woman in the back row started humming along to "What a Wonderful World." Another woman closed her eyes and swayed to Debussy. The snoring man woke up and tapped his foot to a Gershwin tune. After 45 minutes, when David played his final song, several residents were crying. Not sad tears, but the kind that come from being moved by something beautiful, from being transported somewhere else for a little while, from remembering. An elderly man in a wheelchair rolled up to David afterward. His hands shook with tremors, but he gripped David's hand firmly. "My wife used to play," he said, his voice rough. "She had Alzheimer's, forgot my name, forgot our children, forgot everything. But she never forgot the piano. Until the very end, if you sat her at a piano, she could still play. Music is the last thing that leaves us. Thank you for reminding me of her." David had to sit in his car for 10 minutes before driving home. He was crying so hard. This was what his mother had understood. This was why she'd chosen teaching over performing. Music wasn't just about technical excellence or concert halls. It was about connection. about reaching people in moments when words failed, about creating beauty in ordinary places. That night, he called Elena and told her about the retirement home performance. "They didn't care that I'm not famous," he said. "They didn't care that the piano was out of tune. They just cared that someone brought music to them." "Now you understand," Elena said. "Now you know what your mother knew." They'd been talking regularly since David left Connecticut. Phone calls, video chats, occasional texts. Elena had become something between a teacher and a grandmother to him. She'd ask about his performances, offer advice, send him recordings she thought he should hear. She'd even attended one of his coffee shop shows, sitting in the back with a hat and sunglasses so nobody would recognize her. "You are doing exactly what you should be doing," she'd told him that night. "Playing with joy, sharing with generosity, living with intention." Your mother would burst with pride. David had started teaching too. Just one student so far, a 10-year-old girl whose parents had responded to a flyer he'd posted at the coffee shop. She reminded him of himself at that age, eager but impatient, wanting to play the good songs before learning the basics. He understood her better than he thought he would. He had patience he didn't know he possessed. During their lessons, he found himself using phrases his mother had used. "Feel the music, don't just play the notes. Your fingers are telling a story. Even mistakes can be beautiful if you keep going." The words came naturally, like they'd been waiting inside him all this time. The video from the hotel continued to circulate online. Every few weeks it would resurface on some platform or another, and David's inbox would fill with messages. Most were kind. People telling him the video had made them cry, or inspired them to return to an instrument they'd abandoned, or reminded them of someone they'd lost. Some messages were from musicians offering advice, sharing their own stories of finding music later in life or after a long break. One email was from a producer asking if David wanted to record an album. He'd politely declined. That wasn't what this was about, but one message stood out. It was from a woman who'd been at the hotel that day. She'd been having the worst day of her life, she wrote. She'd just come from a meeting where she'd been laid off from a job she'd held for 15 years. She'd been sitting in the lobby trying not to cry, trying to figure out how to tell her family, when David started playing. "I don't know if you'll remember," she wrote, "but I was sitting on the sofa about 20 feet from the piano. I was the one in the gray suit crying into my phone. Your music made me stop. It made me put the phone down and just breathe. It reminded me that life isn't just about jobs and money and status. There's beauty in the world, and that's worth remembering even when everything feels broken. I found a better job a month later, but I don't think I would have had the strength to keep looking if you hadn't played that day. Thank you for sitting down at that piano." David read the email 3 times. Then he saved it in a special folder on his computer. When he doubted whether any of this mattered, whether his small performances in coffee shops and community centers meant anything, he'd reread messages like that one. Elena announced in December that she was starting a foundation, the Catherine Chen Memorial Music Foundation. It would provide scholarships and free lessons to young musicians from families who couldn't afford traditional music education. It would support community music programs in underserved areas. It would fund instruments for schools that had lost their music programs to budget cuts. Your mother believed everyone deserved access to music, Elena explained when she told David about the foundation. Not just the wealthy, not just the talented, everyone. She taught students who could barely afford lessons. She never turned anyone away. This foundation will continue that work. David was named to the advisory board.